Jackson, prominent member of the Black Panther Party. In his blood-soaked cell, the following writing was found, and this is what it said. You may take the last strip of my land, feed my youth to prison cells. You may plunder my heritage. You may burn my books and poems. You may put out the light in my eyes. You may deprive me of my mother's kisses. You may curse my father and my people. You may distort my history. I may, if you wish, lose my livelihood. I may sell shirt and bed. I may work as a stone cutter, a street sweeper, a porter. I may clean your stores or rummage garbage for food. O enemy of the sun, but I shall not compromise. And to the last pulse in my veins, I will resist. I will resist. I will resist. Now those words, while not long after that they were published and credited to George Jackson, they were in fact written by Samih al-Qasim. The poem's name was Adu al-Shams. Now what that speaks to is not only the universality of the Palestinian tragedy, it speaks to the intersections of Palestinian struggle with what the Black Panthers identified as their struggle for equal rights at the time. Now the Black Panthers were clear about something, that racism is about material conditions and structural inequalities. It is not as simple as the behavior from one human being to another. They understood what we today are being told and often hear the word microaggressions as mere manifestations of the structural imbalance of power within the society. Because, my friends and the delegation from the embassy, what we must understand is that racism is not simply newspaper headlines aimed at Meghan Markle. Racism is the Prevent program, which allows children who show solidarity with Palestinians to be taken out of their classrooms and questioned by police. Racism is the gangs matrix, which has been condemned by Amnesty International, which is putting what is around 13% of the population, i.e. the ethnic minorities within this country, under the microscope to such an extent that they are disproportionately put on databases as potentially being involved in gang-related activity later on. Racism is Yarl's Wood. It's the detention centres across this country which allow indefinite detention of people that are racialised a certain way. Now, to bring back that understanding of racism, I would like to quote the first president of the State of Israel, a man by the name of Chaim Weizmann, who worked tirelessly in this country, if you read his book, Trial and Error, to get the Balfour Declaration published. And let's never forget that who was his number one nemesis in getting the Balfour Declaration published? None other than Edwin Montagu, the only Jewish member of the cabinet at that time. Following the passing of the Balfour Declaration, Chaim Weizmann said the following: "With regard to the Arab question, the British told me that there are several 100,000 Negroes there, but that is of no significance to us." We think about, and it's an interesting person for us to come to now, is the person in Israel that has more streets named after them than any other human being, Mr. Jabotinsky. He said the following: "Zionist colonization, even the most restricted, must either be terminated or carried out in defiance of the will of the native population, because every indigenous people will resist alien settlers." When we look at across the Zionist movement prior to the foundation of the state, there was consensus between Ben-Gurion and Vladimir Jabotinsky that in fact the Palestinians were the indigenous people of Palestine. It's not a controversial fact in terms of the initial leaders of the Zionist movement, though today there seems to be a war on memory, as some have called it, memoricide. When we look at what has happened to those anti-racist leaders who have chosen to stand with the Palestinians and take a costly position. Patrisse Cullors, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, told me personally that following their stand with the Palestinians and their trip to Palestine, a lot of their funding was cut. They had funders who pulled out, refusing to back Black Lives Matter because they stood with the Palestinians. How can we forget Mark Lamont Hill, the fantastic presenter formerly employed by CNN, but following his rousing speech at the United Nations calling for Palestinian freedom, who was fired, who was liberated of his livelihood because of the position he took. He also made the point that during the protests in Ferguson that were being tear-gassed by the police in the United States, they were receiving, the protesters there, following the killing of Mike Brown, they were receiving advice from Palestinian activists on how to deal with tear gas and the horrific consequences that take place. In terms of Israel and historical precedent, we could look no further than the Prime Minister of South Africa in the 60s, apartheid South Africa, Hendrik Verwoerd. He said the following: Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state. The UN Convention Against Apartheid says clearly, any measures designed to divide the population along racial lines, prohibition of mixed marriages, expropriation of landed property belonging to a racial group, qualifies as apartheid. And in fact, I would like to quote another war criminal, Ehud Barak, former defense minister, said the following: as long as in this territory west of the Jordan River there is one political entity called Israel, it is going to either be non-Jewish or non-democratic. If this bloc of millions of Palestinians cannot vote, that will be an apartheid state. Today, it is accepted by all as fact that an arrangement in South Africa that had between 10 and 13% of the population ruling 87% of the population was not sustainable in any way, shape, or form. It was a social imbalance and it was racist. What we have to also be clear about is that at the time when apartheid South Africa was largely a pariah, who was it that was seeking to arm them with nuclear weapons? None other than Shimon Peres and Israel. I would also like to quote an alumni of this institution, the hotbed of intelligence and the cultivator of secure autocracy maniacs that it is, Desmond Tutu. By the way, just by attending this event, all of you are now a cash cow to the securitocracy. There are people that are probably employed to look at the most mundane elements of your Google searches and whatever you do. Just for attending an event like this, it seems you are qualified as an extremist. Now, if we're going to look at what Desmond Tutu said, he said the following: in South Africa, we could not have achieved our democracy without the help of people around the world, who through the use of non-violent means, such as boycotts and divestments, encouraged their government and other corporate actors to reverse decades-long support for the apartheid regime. The same issues of inequality and injustice today motivate the divestment movement, trying to end Israel's decades-long occupation of Palestinian territory and the unfair and prejudicial treatment of the Palestinian people by the Israeli government ruling over them. We cannot forget that in fact in the example of South Africa, where culture moved government policy eventually followed. And yes, it was a process of decades, but it did take place. The Musicians' Union of this country was actually believed to be the first trade grouping to ban its members from performing in apartheid South Africa following the Sharpeville massacre in 1960. Of course, we know that in 1985, when Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan released Sun City, you had a situation where at that time it was even illegal to show pictures of Nelson Mandela in South Africa. You had the situation where Europeans refusing to buy apartheid fruit and other goods that were produced off the back of this unequal relationship led to strikes by dock workers from Liverpool to Melbourne who refused to handle these goods. We do not exceptionalize Israel through any specific fascination with it as a state. As Ben White puts it, Israel is exempted from sanction for breaking international law. It is not we who exceptionalize Israel, it is the international community which exceptionalizes Israel, and thus we target it on that basis. We are not the radicals here. According to the UN Charter, it is illegal under international law to acquire land by force. According to the 4th Geneva Convention, it is illegal to colonize occupied land and transfer non-indigenous population to that land. Israel violates the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child through detention, interrogation, and imprisonment of juveniles. Israel has a legalized discrimination against the Palestinians. It is that which we oppose. And the difference here is not between those who are Jewish and those who are Palestinian. It's not between those who are Muslim and those who are Jewish. It's between those who believe in the equality of all and those who believe in the supremacy of some.